And we continue in the book, Creating Christianity, a Weapon of Ancient Rome by Henry Davis, sympathetically reveals how the Roman and Jewish aristocracies created the most famous story of all time. Today we're going to continue in part 1 of this book, as it says here, the Gospels. The Torah was a holy book that the Jews guarded and cherished with their life, and they shared these manuscripts all over ancient Israel, except Jerusalem, as the Romans had destroyed the Jewish presence there. The different sects in Judea, the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the Essenes, the Zealots, held varying beliefs about their religion. The Essene sect, who lived in Qumran on the west bank of the Judean desert, likely followed the rebellion because of their messianic expectations. When the Romans occupied Qumran, the Essenes stored manuscripts in the caves for fear of them being destroyed. Eventually, Qumran was conquered in 68 AD, and archaeological remains show that the Romans burned this area to the ground, and after the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, they then turned their attention to Masada. To complete their victory in 73 AD, the conquering of Qumran forced the Jews to try and save the scrolls by hiding them in the caves. Those scrolls are known today as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Much like today, during that time, there were no actual rules in place concerning who could produce literature for the people within the Roman Empire, but there was no freedom of speech either. Only 1 or 2% of the population could actually read and write, those being nobles, merchants, and rich individuals. And the royalty of the day had to agree with all the literature being circulated. Otherwise, the author would not live long. Considering the slaves copied these various books or book rolls one by one, means only high society people had the powers to achieve this, okay? What is interesting is this research shows that at that time, only those of royal status wrote public literature. Following the war, Rome took command of all churches and temples, which means that the Roman emperor of the time after the war would have had to allow and agree to any holy writing being read out and distributed in around the empire and in the other territories under Roman authority. This limits just who would have been able to write religious texts. All right, that's a major key right there. He's trying to bring you into a perspective, give you reference of that time. What was it like? Who was really publishing or writing things? It wasn't just regular people like they tell us. The early Christian literature becomes suspicious regarding this, as so far no concrete information regarding the author's identities has been provided. Okay, they haven't been able to prove none of the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? So they're telling you only speculations. Within the Roman Empire, the emperor controlled all publishing, the lives of philosophers and where they lived, access to the royal library of Alexandria in Egypt, and all places of religious interest. Writers had a great influence on people, and so the emperor tried to control what was available, all right? So writers had a big control on the people, right? On the masses, your books, just like movies do today. Persuasion, right? With bookshops often being raided and undesirable books destroyed. So they were censoring stuff, right? You see that? They were controlling the flow of information. Emperor Augustus ordered private houses to be searched for books he took a dislike to. So writers had to be careful when writing about powerful people in Rome, as the punishment meant death. As we learn from the writer Juvenal, a Roman poet active in the late 1st and early 2nd century AD, the best thing to do was wait until someone died before you criticized them. By the time of the 4th century AD, Rome had 28 large libraries where citizens could read books for free. However, government officials called prefects selected the books that appeared in these libraries. In this way, the government could control what information was available. Now, you see what they were doing back then, right? Controlling the information. Supporting information regarding the rules around literature come from Appian in his Civil Wars, written approximately 160 AD. He says Laena, under instructions from Antony, cut off Cicero's head. He also cut off the hand with which Cicero had written his attacks on Antony. The head and hand of Cicero were suspended for a long time from the rostra in the forum where formerly he had made speeches. Another example comes from Tacitus, the Roman historian and politician, in his book The Annals of Imperial Rome, where in 118 AD he says the Senate ordered his books to be burned by the aediles, but they survived, first hidden and later republished. The stupidity of people who believe that today's authority can destroy tomorrow's memories. That was a deep phrase right there. The stupidity of people who believe that today's authority can destroy tomorrow's memories. They can't stop our truth either. That's a deep one right there. That applies to what we're doing in our journey, right? This is a statement regarding when the Roman historian Cremutius Cordus criticized the power of the emperors. All public literature went through a Roman filter. And to maintain this control, the emperor used secret police, secret police called the frumentari. These officials of the Roman Empire were originally wheat collectors, but acted as the secret service of the Roman Empire in the 2nd and 3rd centuries. You hear that? And their loyalty was to the emperor. But with these rules in place, it brings us back to the discoveries regarding Flavius, Josephus, and the New Testament itself. The evidence seems to suggest the authors of the Gospels would need to be literate enough to create writings for public use, but they would also need to have the means to reproduce them if under threat of being destroyed. If literate high priests wrote the Gospels, records clarifying this should exist. All right, that's true. Listen to what they're telling you. If literate high priests wrote the Gospels, records clarifying this should exist. Possibly, if illiterate peasants gave these eyewitness accounts, then those who were literate would need to have written them. So the question again is, who were the authors? The first thing to understand when researching the Gospels is that the word kata appears with the name following it. For example, tu kata matoion, and it keeps going, which means the according to Matthew holy glad tidings. According to. Key term right there, according to. Supposedly, right, written by, I heard it, according to this guy. Well, according to him, according to T-Bone, this is what happened, this is what went down, and then he went over there, and then they went over there, and then this he came over here, and then he according to. You get it? You never notice that all these books in the New Testament, especially of the disciples, always according to Luke, according to Mark, according to a third person is telling the story. You get it? The verb glad tidings is translated in the King James Bible as to preach the gospel. The English word gospel is created from the Anglo-Saxon God spell. You hear this? Meaning good news or tidings. But glad tidings occurs in King James Bible and translates as evangelion, which is the classical Greek word meaning good news. Hey, I got good news for you. I got a gospel. I got good news. Check this out. I got a God spell, a ghost spell. The word kata in Greek designates the source, not the author. A different form of Greek would designate the author, such as archegus. So when these names were attached to the accounts, somebody was claiming the names were the sources for the author. Somebody said, according to, right? It's like somebody who's a non-believer in the research and sources we show, and they don't watch my videos, right? So, and this, let's say a Pan-African, for example, right? He don't even watch my videos. So he goes to his boy, says, hey, guess what? According to Kurimeo, you get what I'm trying to say? According to. So never directly saying, yo, this was written by Mark. Yo, this was written by, you know, it always says according to. It doesn't give you a definite confirmation like this is the book of Isaiah. This is the book of Jeremiah. This is the book of Hosea. This is the book of Joshua. You get it? Those are primary sort, like direct first-hand accounts, right? Not third persons according to's. All right, so something that's very obvious in the New Testament. But they cannot be eyewitnesses, as Matthew copies Mark using the same words. And if you were an eyewitness, why would you use the words of someone who is not an eyewitness? Exactly. So he's saying there's a lot of parts, and even in the different books of the disciples, they're repeating the same things. And these are supposed to be accounts of different people. This is what the New Oxford Annotated Bible has to say on the matter. Scholars generally agree that the Gospels were written 40 to 60 years after the death of Jesus. They are not eyewitness or contemporary accounts of Jesus' life and teaching. Okay? This is in the New Oxford Annotated Bible. Even the language has changed, right? Even the language, even worse, the language has changed. Though Greek had become the common language used by groups whose primary languages were different in the Eastern Roman Empire, and inscriptions and fragments of Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible show that Greek was used among Jews within Judea, Jesus, his disciples, and the crowds would have used Aramaic, a Semitic language closely related to Hebrew, which it had replaced as the principal spoken language of Palestine. Despite scholarly efforts to detect an underlying Aramaic original for Mark or Matthew, right, they've never been able to kind of really find that. It is probable that all the evangelists wrote in the common Koine Greek of their day. Further, the vast majority of Hebrew Bible citations in the New Testament are taken from the Greek translations of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint. All right. So you guys listening? Most of the original New Testament, right, writings were in Greek, and that's where we get the Septuagint, right, version of the Bible, the Greek, right, New Testament. The New Oxford Annotated Bible, New Revised Standard Version, page 1380. I reference it if you like. For an article investigating when the Septuagint was created, please visit www.henryhdavis.com. Secondly, as mentioned above, the Greek word for gospel is evangelion, which again, as shown above, means good news. According to the Standard Theological Dictionary, the word gospel means the good news of military victory. Guess what, guys? I got good news. We won. We beat the Hebrews. We took over the promised land. Guess what? We got good news. Hey, everybody, gather around. Gather around. I'm here to evangelize you or bring you good news. We won. We beat the Hebrews. We won. So, a military victory. If we look at Mark's gospel closely, we can see that being the case. And he gives some examples here saying Jesus has authority over doctrine, 121 to 22, 27. Jesus has authority and victory over demons, 123, 27, 34. Jesus has authority and victory over disease. Jesus has authority and victory over sin, and it gives you the verses. Jesus has authority over the Sabbath and traditions. Jesus has authority and victory over Satan's strong man. Jesus has authority and victory over storms. Jesus has authority and victory over death. When reading the above, if for a moment we put the words Rome in place of the word Jesus, right? Let's go back. Let's go back. He said, instead of saying Jesus, put Rome, right? It says, Rome has authority and victory over sin. Rome has authority over the Sabbath and traditions. All right. So remember, they were trying to break you out of the Sabbath and those traditions, right? That was one of the codes, no? That was one of the codes, the commandments, keep the Sabbath, right? So it's in Mark, it was telling you that Jesus had authority over Sabbath. Now all of a sudden, we got a new tune. We got a New Testament, guys. Guess what? We got a New Testament and we got good news. Okay? We got good news and a New Testament. So he's saying, so replace that word with Rome. We can see that these victories become the military victories of Rome after the Roman-Jewish War. The Jewish presence in Jerusalem was destroyed and Rome had authority over that land. So the military victory meaning of evangelion applies to the Gospels. When we come to the chapter which examines the parallels between Josephus and the Gospels, this fact will hopefully become even more apparent. The Gospels claim to be 4 very separate stories or reports written independently by 4 different individuals, but when we consider the information above, we can see how they were constructed and therefore understand what they are. Mark and Matthew are works of literature and were created using the structure that makes up the Torah, the Old Testament. All right, where they get in their info, where their source for most of it. Again, we got this on part 1. Typology, right? Typology, let's not forget, right? They were creating and using the structure, right, that makes up the Torah, the Old Testament. The Torah, the traditional and sacred book of the Jews that is made up of 5 sacred books, appears to have been used as the basis for creating the 5 parts in these Gospels. That means someone used the origin story presented within the Torah to create the origin story of Jesus. They used the theme of Exodus, which means leaving Egypt or bondage, right, to create the passage about Jesus visiting Egypt, simply a reversal of what appears in the Torah. The book of Numbers is, according to the story, an account of how God ordered a continuing of the people, a census, of the 12 tribes of Israel, a census. After counting all the men who were over 20 and fit to fight, the Israelites began to travel in a well-ordered division. In Hebrew, it means the book of the wilderness. And that leads to the passage in which Jesus goes into the wilderness. Next, we have Deuteronomy, the important section in the 5th book of the Torah, in which Moses gives law to the Israelites on the mountain. In Mark and Matthew, we see the story of the Sermon on the Mount, in which Jesus gives a new law. Finally, we have the book of Leviticus, the 3rd book of the Torah, which is the account of the sacrifice, which was used to create the story of the crucifixion. In the book of Exodus, Moses is told to go to Egypt and come back from Egypt. And that part was used to describe how Jesus' father is told to go into Egypt because of the destruction of the children. So one story is used as a literary structure to create another story. And if that is the case, it is not a historical account. Continuing in the book, Creating Christianity, a Weapon of Ancient Rome. Now, you may be familiar with the following arguments regarding why there should be a mention of Jesus outside of the New Testament. But for those who are not, I will present a few of them. The New Testament contains some 24 scriptures in which Jesus is said to be famed far and wide in performing miracles. For example, in 1 Corinthians, 500 people supposedly saw him resurrected. And at his death there were earthquakes, the sun darkens, and the saints rise out of the ground and wander through the streets of Jerusalem. And it says here, quotes, and the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose, and came out of the graves after his resurrection, and went into the holy city, and appeared unto many. All right, that's in the New Testament, right? They're talking about zombies, literally coming out the grave. This unique event is not recorded in the historical record of the day. The question is why. The period in which this event happened is one of the best documented in history. All right, this period, people were recording things, what he's saying. It should have been recorded. So I think it's very reasonable to assume that the above event would have been noticed. Jesus was also supposedly rampaging through the streets, going into the temples, and feeding 5,000 people with fishes and loaves of bread. And this area was a very busy trade route. But even if people did not mention him, it's reasonable to think that the other issues that were going on at that time would have been noticed. It is written that the curtain of the temple was torn in two from the top to bottom at Jesus' death, in Matthew 27:50, meaning there was damage to the Jewish temple. That should have been recorded somewhere other than the Bible, as the Jews would have been very protective of their temple if somebody had entered there in an aggressive manner, such as this. In another incident, Jesus threatens to destroy the temple, Matthew 26:61, and he's calling the Jews sons of Satan, which was blasphemy and deserved the death penalty. Again, it can be expected that the Jews would have recorded that incident. But even the supposed persecution of the Christians by Paul, all right, Paul, future character and all this. What does Paul have to do with all this? Who was Saul, supposedly. So Paul, who was Saul, at the time does not make it into the historical record. So Paul's not even in history. An individual who should have recorded something of these events, a man named Philo. All right, Philo. We talked about Philo, all right? Philo, we're going to get a lot of correlation of him possibly even being Piso, the same person, Josephus. So it says here, Philo Judea of Alexandria, Judaeus, a Jewish historian who was living at the exact time and who was part of the wealthiest family on the planet, says nothing but his logos, word of God idea, appears in the New Testament. Philo was an important historian at this time, but in his works he does not write about a Jesus that would be seen as the Messiah of the Gospels. The only similarity in his incarnate word, the logos, which was significantly developed by the Greeks as the living word of God, all right? And they're true, that's a Hellenistic thing, all right? We talked about this in my thought videos, go back about the logos. Who's the logos? The ancient of ancients. Who was the real logos according to Hellenistic views? Hermes, Stuff, the ancient of ancients. Who is that? Continues, says, and Philo describes the words that end up in the New Testament. Philo wrote, the logos of the living God is the bond of everything, holding all things together. So that's something Philo, a famous historian, wrote, right? And this is what the New Testament says. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Colossians 1:17. Who wrote Colossians? What is that? Get it? Another perhaps trivial point, but a valid one, is regarding the three kings, or the biblical magi, also referred to as the three wise men, who make only one appearance in the Gospels, the Gospel of Matthew. These wise men felt that the birth of Jesus was so important enough to visit him, even bringing gifts, but we have no record of them or from them regarding this visit. So what happened? It is by considering all these factors and putting them into context and culture of that time that the only possible way the story would have been able to gain credibility is for it to be product of those who control the creation of religious laws. The Old Testament is a set of laws. All right, Torah means the book of law. Are you following the laws, keeping the code? And the New Testament gave new laws. All right, so then they came with, hey, we got some new laws here, guys. We got the New Testament here. We got a new tune for you. Which is why the story of Jesus does not present itself as it should in history, especially considering other recorded events. Jesus' story parallels past ancient Messiah stories. All right, remember, you guys go back to my thought videos. We talked about it a little bit, right? We know that, there's the Isis, Osiris and Horus, thing, the Trinity. We got that all over the place, right? Like there's a lot of messiahs before him, right? Who got crucified, who died on the third day, resurrected, right? All that. Mithra, We've gone over this, so we know what he's talking about, right? Jesus' story parallels past ancient Messiah stories and uses attributes from other gods worshipped around the empire. Remember, they were adding their pagan stuff too. Those gods include the Etruscan god Usil, who walked on water, the Egyptian god Osiris, who came forth from the tomb, Dionysus Bacchus, the god of wine, and the Greco-Egyptian god Aesculapius Serapis, all right? Serapis, all right? Serapis, the god of healing. Real quick, before we continue, all right? So if you just Google Serapis, you can do it yourself. This is what you get, statue of Serapis. Now, what does this look like? Jesus, you know, the image they put of Jesus, right? And also of Zeus, like this bust of Zeus, all right? You see this? This is what they were worshiping. Check out my thought videos. The people who were following Serapis, we read this 3 to 4 years ago, and I was trying to understand, like, wow, right? How did these people become the early Christians, these worshippers of Serapis, right? And Serapis, Apis, the ape is the bull, right? Check out my thought videos again, right? It's all coming in full circle now. And, you know, this is why I didn't do a part 3, because it was starting to get really deep and I needed to really understand a lot of things before I try to do videos on it. So we're about to get back into that. I just wanted to show you, this is Serapis. Again, who are they mixing? This allegorical person, Jesus, they're combining so many things, putting this superhero, Roman superhero, Messiah, Jewish Messiah that they created, right? With all these attributes and typologies, epithets, right? Attributes of ancient historic people, mythological, gods, pagans, and Hebrew kings, prophets, and messiahs. All right, so I wanted to add this. This is one of them. All right, this is another one that they attribute. You know, they even got the name Jesus. You see, Jesus was a Gaulish god known from two monumental statues. All right, so Jesus, it says here, on the Gallo-Roman pillar of the Bowman, Gallo-Roman. That's just so significant to the Pisos. I'm going to show you guys why. If not in this video, but maybe in a future one in this series, I'm going to show you where the Pisos are coming from. So this guy's Jesus is always cutting down trees. Jesus, all right? Jesus. All right, so coming back to the book, how it was letting us know how they're mixing all these pagan gods and putting these stories, same stories, into the life of Jesus. Again, one of the people they were using was Aesculapius Serapis, all right? Serapis, the god of healing. The next step then in this investigation is to examine the background information regarding the first century historians, Flavius Josephus and Philo Judea of Alexandria. Understanding the background of these two individuals will hopefully make it easier to understand the discoveries investigated in the following chapters. All right, so I wanted to come back to this book, right, which is called Piso Christ, Arrius Calpurnius Piso, aka Flavius Josephus, the Roman inventor of the biblical Jesus, the New Testament story, and Christianity. This is written by Roman Piso. I'm going to look into him. Is he a possible descendant? And with J. Gallus, or these pen names, because these are famous family names that the Pisos had, the Piso and Gallus. So I don't know if they're just using pseudonyms, but that's the name of the authors here. There's a part in this book where the author is mentioning these two people. One of them is Sir Ronald Syme, we're going to learn about, and Abelard Rushland. All right, now Abelard Rushland is the guy who wrote this book right here, the True Authorship of the New Testament, right? And which we're gonna definitely get back into, but this one gets very into it right away, specifically, so we gotta build up to it so we can understand everything before it. We're gonna come back to this book. So the author's talking about these two individuals. Let me just read a little bit of what he says here. Abelard Rochland had tried to educate several scholars to the fact that Sir Ronald Syme was privy to the fact that the Roman Piso family invented the Jesus story and the Christian religion, and that they were successful because they were also in control of all that was being written for public consumption at the time, biblical or not. All right, so again, Rochland is the guy who wrote, that other book we just came from, the True Authorship of the New Testament, was very controversial. Actually, first person really coming out straight up, in public mainstream, giving you specific people's names. Like it was the Pisos, who created this, because what he's pointing out, this author right here, is that even though Ronald Syme, who we're going to learn, was one of the most famous Roman historians, he got very specific in a book he wrote. He was very subliminal. He didn't basically say, yeah, the Pisos created Christianity, but he hinted to all of that. So that's what Abelard Rochland was saying, that Ronald Syme knew what he was talking about. He just held it back. He was trying to point that out. So here, read a little bit of Robert Syme, or Sir Robert Syme, right? It says that he was from New Zealand, born historian and classicist. He was regarded as the greatest historian of ancient Rome, all right? The greatest historian of ancient Rome since Theodore Mommsen, and the most brilliant exponent of the history of Roman Empire since Edward Gibbon. His great work, The Roman Revolution, we're going to get into that book, okay? A masterly and controversial. Why is it controversial? If he's the most famous Roman historian, why is the most famous Roman historian his book? Why is it controversial? Is there a reason we never heard of this guy's book in school? Is this a part of Roman history they didn't really emphasize on? So they're saying a masterly and controversial analysis of Roman political life in the period following the assassination of Julius Caesar. Remember, Julius Caesar was married to a Piso. Remember, Julius Caesar's dad is Lucius Calpurnius Piso, who is Arrius Piso, aka Josephus' uncle, right? His brother got murdered by Nero, Piso's dad, Flavius Josephus' dad. Remember, that was from part 1. Make sure you remember that. We're going to get into all this information again. Don't worry. Right now, we're learning about who Ronald Syme. We're talking about real scholarly people, peer-reviewed, the most famous Roman historian, academic in modern times, right? I'm going to show you that in his book, he got the Pisos all over in there. So the Piso family were real. They were real. I'm going to show you that. So I come back into the book. Now we know who Ronald Syme is. We know who Abelard Rochland is. Again, Abelard Rochland, the author of the book, The True Authorship of the New Testament. Very famous book that circled the internet a lot all these years. So this author, again in the book Piso Christ, he's just pointing out these two people who pointed this out before him. So what he says about them, it says Rochland had tried to explain to scholars the reason that Syme was able to write in such detail in all of the various areas of Roman history and that he wrote about, because he was looking at it with the great advantage of seeing it from the inside, looking out, right? From the inside, looking out at those who did not understand what he knew. Only by being inner circle, he was down with somebody, right? They were part of a secret society. Most likely is that what that means. Only by being an inner circle could he draw the conclusions and raise the kind of questions that he did. As a matter of fact, Syme's work is what had made it possible for other inner circle members to make more progress in their own research. Abelard Rochland and other inner circle members had been reading Syme's work for many years, from which much information was gathered. More mention of Syme's particular work is in the bibliography of this book. The death of Sir Ronald Syme, even though he was quite elderly, came as a great shock to many people who had been following his work. He was born in 1903 and died in September 1989, a British historian by profession. He studied and taught at Oxford University. He was a patriotic Brit, serving the British government both in Belgrade and Ankara during World War II. Syme had been a fellow at Trinity College, Oxford, from 1929 and 1949. He was a professor of classical philology and taught at the University of Istanbul from 1942 to 1945, and Camden, professor of ancient texts and fellow at Brasenose College, Oxford, as well as a fellow of Wolfson College, Oxford, all right? The guy was scholarly, all right? So this ain't a controversial thing. This is not pseudo. Okay, well, this is why we're breaking this down little by little. It doesn't matter how many parts we take, right? Sir Ronald Syme was an eminent scholar of classical Roman, very well respected by his peers, okay? However, he was also wise enough to realize the fact that had he tried to publicly present his findings, as we are doing now, he would have suffered the same fate as Bruno Bauer. He would have lost all the credibility that he had gained in the world of academia. This is because it is vastly huge task to compile and publish all this information into a comprehensive form which people can readily understand. And I'm going to say right there, tell me about it. And I'm going to tell you guys, I've been holding these books, well, not these Kindle ones, but the other two, especially the True Authorship of the New Testament and Caesar's Messiah book. Shout out to Drop Nation. I got that from there. You know, we've been holding these books for like 3 or 4 years, and I've been wanting to do videos on it, but I had to have my understanding of it first, you know? Because like he's saying, it is a big undertaking to compile. It's a huge task to compile and publish all this information in a comprehensive form, or make a video about it in a comprehensive form, right? Which people can readily understand. Hope you guys are following along. It requires many things which most people, even scholars, are not used to, including learning many completely new and different concepts, okay? That's the problem with most master teachers. They think they got it all figured out. See, that's the thing. I ain't a master teacher. I'm a master student. We're learning. We got to keep learning. Can't think we got it all figured out. You got to be open to different concepts, all right? While examining everything with a very objective and agile mind. This subject matter is not easy. It must be researched in an open-minded manner. Syme simply realized the truth of the situation and went quietly about his work, knowing that his research would help future generations after they realized the underlying truth about ancient history. All right? And that's what we're doing. And we're going to go to his book right now. So thank you. All right, so I'm on archive.org. I found the book right here for free. Okay, again, this is The Roman Revolution by Ronald Syme. This was written in 1939. These are some of the contents of the book. So you can see Introduction, Augustus and History, the Roman oligarchy, right? Who were in control, right? Control, the domination of Pompeo, Caesar the dictator, the Caesarian party, Caesar's new senators, the consul, Antonius, and so on and so on. You guys can see all the different topics: the government, the cabinet, the succession, the opposition, the doom of the nobles, the doom of the nobles, okay? Genealogical tables. So I just want to show you guys that in this version of the book, this book I have here, they actually didn't scan or they erased the genealogical tables. Let me just show you. So you see, they just blurred out most of it. They did something. Now what I did is I put in Piso as a search word in this book, and I got all these results right here. So I just want to show you guys that this is real history when we're talking about these people, the Pisos, the Piso family, the dynasty. All right, so on this page, I believe 6 it says here, it talks about a section of the Roman Empire called the Cispalline Gaul region. And we're going to read a little bit further, is where it seems to be where the Pisos might have originated from, okay? And this was a region of Gaul people or Gaulish people, the Gauls, right? The Gauls. That's why earlier I was saying Gallo-Roman, that Gallo-Roman culture, that's what it is, the Gaulish people being influenced and adapting all the culture of the Romans, and they were called the Gallo-Romans. So it's just stating here that in this region, Caesar was given that region. It says, to this end, Caesar was granted the province of Cispalline Gaul, which dominated Italy for 5 years. Now it says here further, the 3 rulers designated consuls for the next year, L. Calpurnius Piso, that's Lucius, that's Arius' uncle, Lucius Calpurnius Piso, a cultivated aristocrat with no marked political activities, and A. Gabinius, a Pompeian partisan. All right, so this just referencing these 2 people as the consuls in that area, the Cisalpine Gaul area they called. On page 62, and it says right here, a counselor who could stand neutral without the imputation of lack of courage or principle was Caesar's father-in-law. All right, Caesar's father-in-law, right? Remember, Caesar was married to a Piso woman. Caesar's father-in-law, the virtuous L. Calpurnius Piso, that's Lucius. Again, that's Flavius Josephus' uncle. Okay? When hostilities were imminent, Piso offered to mediate between Caesar and Pompeius, and during the civil wars, he did not abate his sincere efforts in the cause of concord. Very important person right here, right? This Lucius Piso in this book, as you can see, real Roman history. Page 74, we get this reference on the footnote. It says here, number 5, the maternal grandfather of Lucius Calpurnius Piso was a businessman called Calventius from the colony Cicero. All right, so now we got a genealogy here. Again, we start seeing who these people are historically, okay? It's about on page 135 or chapter 10 of this book. It says the senior statesman. All right, a little bit more info here. It says, in the Senate, 3 men of consular rank had spoken against Antonius, namely Lucius Piso, P. Servilius, and Cicero, and therefore might be said to have encouraged the designs of Octavianus. That was all they had in common in character, career, and policy. The 3 counselors were discordant and irreconcilable. Piso, all right, who's Piso? Piso is an aristocrat of character and discernment, united loyalty to Roman standards of conduct with lively appreciation of the literature and philosophy of Hellas. He was the friend and patron of Philodemus, all right, the poet and scholar. Now listen to this, all right? Remember, Lucius is Flavius Josephus, aka Arius Piso's uncle, all right? This is his uncle. And they're saying that his uncle is friends with Philodemus. We just read about that last book telling us that we need to understand who Philo is, right? And I'm going to show you eventually. It seems that Philo is Josephus, is Arius. So it's interesting that they say right here in this book, the author knew, right, the different pseudonames. He's letting you know that Lucius, who's Josephus' uncle, is friends with Philodemus, who we're going to see it's most likely Josephus too, the poet and scholar. Though elegant in his taste, Piso suited his way of living to his family tradition and to his fortune. All right, they had money, to his fortune. The Pisos, they have power and money. Okay, Pisos, which would not have supported ostentatious display and senseless luxury. Being the father-in-law of Caesar, all right, remember, he's the father-in-law of Caesar. Caesar was married to a Piso. Okay, a little bit of Piso here on this page. All right, just want to show you guys. I mean, I would love to read this book. We're probably going to read a lot of this book when we're talking about the Romans, right? We're going to get more into this, right? Nations of the world, Idumeans and all these people, all these clans, all these families, dynasties, you know, break them down. Because in Rome, right, we know in Rome, the Romans were colonizing many different nations like the Gauls, and they were making them Roman citizens. So when we think of history, we just see Romans, right? So like when we see World War I, we see, or World War II, right? We see America, right? Or Americans, or USA going to fight against the Germans, right? But when we think of American soldiers, we got to remember there was a lot of different nations included there. There's Italians, there's Irish, right? There's white people, so-called black people, Native Americans fighting in the wars. It doesn't mean they're all the same people. So what I'm trying to say is, when we think of Romans, remember Rome was a melting pot. it wasn't as a lot of different people, even Jews, a lot of the Cimri, a lot of the Gauls, a lot of the Celts, all these people became Roman citizens. The Iberians, a lot of North Africans, these people became Roman citizens, and they were looked later on in life, even if they were there for hundreds of years, their dynasties, they were just Roman later, eventually, right? So that's what happens, kind of what I'm going to show you with the Pisos. They were really Gaul people. So I'm going to page 150 right now. I read a couple of these pages before I recorded this. Very interesting what it was saying about the Romans, how we think that these people were very morally, you know, how the way they write history, like they were so civilized, but they were actually doing a lot of bad things, you know, being very murderous, corruption, you know, oppressing people, having orgies, doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And he wrote about it in this book. And on this part, it says there were more damaging charges. So apart from the stuff he just described, which I read, right, we're going to read it in future videos, don't worry. It says there were more damaging charges than mere vice in Roman public life. The lack of ancestors, all right? No pedigrees. Listen to this. The lack of ancestors, the taint of trade, or the stage, the shame of municipal origin. Because a lot of people were just coming from places where people weren't very popular. Like they were Gauls, were seen as uncivilized or barbarians, you know. As for Piso, right, we're talking about Lucius Calpurnius Piso. This is Josephus' uncle, Josephus' uncle. As for Piso, his grandfather did not come from the ancient colony of Placentia at all right? Remember, we read that the Calpurni were coming from Placentia, which is kind of close to where they're going to put them right now, but it's not really from there. That was a more luxurious place to be known to come from, so they kind of must have said that. This author, again, Roman historian, right, the most famous Roman historian, is letting you know that his grandfather, actually, which is Josephus' great-grandfather, was from Mediolanium, and he was an Insumbrian Gaul, exercising the ill-famed profession of auctioneer, or stay worse than that, he had emigrated there. So he was not even from there. He was coming from there, but he wasn't even originally from there. He was coming from the land of trousered Gauls beyond the Alps. Trousered Gauls? What does that mean? So when I was Googling all this stuff, you guys, before I recorded this, I realized trousered Gauls, they were calling these people that were wearing pants with trousers like uncivilized. And when you had the toga or the skirt, that was civilized, literally. There's some quick examples here. Definition of trouser, right? Then I give you the, this one in the bottom, it says right here, right? It says Caesar made a complete conquest of Gaul in 55 BC. In ancient times, the civilized races were untrousered, meaning they had togas, the civilized ones. So meaning the ones that didn't have togas or had trousers were uncivilized. You get it? That's what they're saying. Now I want to read this website real quick. But the civilizing of the barbarians under Roman rule provides a unifying historical theme of the geography. The idea that Roman rule and contact with Rome had beneficial effects of this kind reoccurs in other texts. Mela relates how the worst barbarity of the Gauls, right, the barbers or the Berbers of the Gauls, the barbarity of the Gauls of the interior, human sacrifice, they were sacrificing humans, had now been abolished. And he also mentions that Narbonensis used to be called Gallia Bracata, which meant trousered Gaul, the trousered Gaul, as opposed to Gallic Togata, the term used at the time for Gaelic Italy, because they wore the toga, right, the togata. So again, wearing trousers for the Romans was looked as uncivilized. So let me go back to the book again real quick. Again, it says his father, right, was an Insumbrian Gaul, right? An Insumbrian Gaul. And he came originally, he wasn't just an Insumbrian, but he came from the trousered Gauls, the barbarians. It says here, bracao is the Latin term for trousers and is the context in today used to refer to a style of trousers made from wool. According to the Romans, this style of clothing originated from the Gauls. The Gauls, trousers, look at that, trousers. They were used to togas. So the Cispalline Gaul, right, as it says here, was the part of Italy inhabited by the Celts or Gauls. Okay, Gauls, all right? So there's a part of Italy where the Gauls were, and again, this is where Piso's grandfather was coming from on his paternal side, I believe, but he was an Insumbrian Gaul. Okay, as it says here, it says the Insumbres or Insumbri were an ancient Celtic population settled in Insumbria, right? Insumbria, as you can see here, parts of northern Italy, Insumbres. They were the founders of Mediolanum or Milan. Though completely Gaulish at the time of Roman conquest, they were the result of fusion of pre-existing Ligurian and Celtic population. Okay, so these people, these clans, these nations eventually got taken over by Rome, and they became a lot of them Roman citizens. Okay, so reading about these Gaulish Celtic people that became Roman important people, right? I found this guy Gaius Valerius Trosillius, who was a Helvian Celt who served as an interpreter and envoy for Julius Caesar in the first year of the Gallic War. So he must have ran into the Pisos, right? Because remember, Julius Caesar was married to Piso. His father-in-law was Lucius Piso, a consul, very famous aristocrat. So this guy must have run into them. Found something very interesting here, okay? Now it says here, during his dictatorship, Caesar extended full rights of Roman citizenship to ethnically Celtic Cispalline Gaul, northern Italy. So you see, and this is where the Pisos were coming from, right? And filled the role of the Roman Senate with controversial appointments that included Cispalline and possibly a few Narbonese Gauls. So a lot of people was like, why are you adding all these Gaulish people, right? Why are you letting them become Romans and giving them all this power, right? Again, this is the origin of the Pisos here as Roman aristocrats. So what I'm trying to show you. Now listen to what it says here. It says, although accusations of degrading the Senate with uncivilized trouser-wearing Gauls, uncivilized trouser-wearing Gauls, were exaggerations meant to disparage Caesar's inclusive efforts. Ronald Sim, here we go, back to Ronald Sim, has pointed out that men such as Trosilus and Trogus were educated citizens worthy of such appointments. Gallia Narbonensis, that's a place, can assert a peculiar and proper claim to be the home of trousered senators, whose names are recorded. So Gallia Narbonensis, all right, Gallia Narbonensis. Gallia Narbonensis, again, is a place, all right, was a Roman province located in what is now the Languedoc or province in southern France, where the Huguenots kind of settled, eventually. But it's very important because when we go back to the book, all right, now we got a real reference. He said that his grandfather was coming from Mediolan and he was an Insumbrian Gaul exercising an ill-famed profession of an auctioneer. But even worse is that he wasn't even from there. He actually immigrated thither from the land of trousered Gauls beyond the Alps. All right, let's go back. Narboni. All right, this is beyond the Alps. North of the Alps was a Roman province, been the first Roman province north of the Alps. So it's the same place. So now, again, they were what? They were grabbing people from there. So these Romans, these other Romans who were, more pure Roman, like Idum, probably, less Gaulish, or Gauls or Cimri. Who's the Gauls? Remember from my video, the Cimmerians? Japhet's people, a lot of them, the Gauls a lot of them are from Japhet, the Cimri, the Cimri, the Cimmerian, the Gimri, the Gauls. So this province could boast opulent and cultivated natives of dynasties, families, Hellenized before they became Roman, whose citizenship, so far from being the recent gift of Caesar, went back to proconsuls a generation or two earlier. So this is important. These Hellenized Gaulish people, right, that the Pisos appeared to be coming from, were already Hellenized. They were bringing that Hellenized belief system with them. Remember what that entails. Remember part 1, we told you that the Hebrews, they were fighting the Hellenistic organizations and those in power, right? During the Maccabean Wars, these Greek Hermes teachings, these Hermes Hellenistic thought, Hermes teachings, Hellenistic alchemy, Rosicrucian, Hellenistic teachings eventually is what helped create Christianity. So it's very important, this connection right here we're seeing, and we keep seeing the proof as why they were, going against their own Roman people, right? Like Nero. Remember, the Pisos assassinated Nero. Nero assassinated his dad. Nero killed Josephus' dad, and then the Pisos got him back. They got him out of the throne. Right now we see why they're beefing like that. They're not really the same people, is what I've been trying to show you this whole time. And I'm glad I found that. And I'm glad I found some historical reference by a very scholarly person. Nobody can debunk this. This is real history. We got a little reference here. We might be able to connect these people to their ancient clans. They might be coming from Japhet, who mixed with Hamites, a couple of Danites, But either way, as I said here, he was from the land of the trousered Gauls beyond the Alps, Narboni. Okay? So again, the Roman Revolution by Ronald Syme. I just wanted to show you guys, and this is one of the most famous, if not the most famous, Roman historians, at least in our times, 1900s, 2000s. Okay? And he's literally showing you that the Pisos were a real family and their possible origin and genealogy. Okay? All right, so back in the book, Piso Christ by Roman Piso with J. Gaulish. We go to a part of the book where it talks about profiles of Arrius Piso and his family. And we know there's a historical people, right? Kind of try to break down, this guy had so many alias and pseudonyms. I'm going to break down how and why, show you how the Romans, this was a normal thing for the Romans to have these different kind of titles and names and pseudonyms they gave themselves. Now, it says here, the first source that we look for information on Arrius Piso and his family is in the work done on this subject by Abelard Reuchlin, the True Authorship of the New Testament. This is the very first work that actually talks about Arrius Calpurnius Piso and his family as the authors of the New Testament. One thing that should be noted is, as of this writing, Abelard Reuchlin has corrected a few things in his work which were incorrect for whatever reason, typos, misquotes. One of the main things that he had mentioned, Lucius Calpurnius Piso as Arius Piso's father, he had learned this to be incorrect in the mid-1980s. So after he wrote his book, he discovered the work of Guy Edward Farquhar Chilver on the works of Tacitus. There he realized that Gaius Calpurnius Piso, who was sentenced to death by Nero, was the father of Arrius Piso, full name Arrius Calpurnius Piso. Note that Reuchlin still has not corrected the information in his booklet and does not plan to do so. Instead, he is working on a new, more advanced and informational work to be completed in several volumes. Abelard Reuchlin, in his booklet, The True Authorship of the New Testament, gives the various Piso family alias names and tells us just who were the immediate family members, namely Arrius Piso's sons and his daughters, Claudia, Phoebe, Pompeia, Plotina. He tells us of Arrius Piso's 4 sons, Alexander, Alexander, Julius, Justus, Proculus, Piso, and some things about their children, the grandchildren of Arrius Piso. Reuchlin tells us how one may find where he obtained this information, citing the Vita of Flavius Josephus. In the Vita, you can find that information along with the birth dates for 3 Arrius Piso's sons. Furthermore, in the Vita of Flavius Josephus Arrius Piso, one can also find that under the name of Flavius Josephus, Arrius Piso was married 3 times. This is actually quite a bit of information, and it is amazing to think of just how many so-called scholars over the course of so many hundred years have overlooked this and never put any of this together, as did Reuchlin. Okay? More amazing is that Josephus Arrius Piso makes it so easy to learn the age of each of three of his sons by giving their births by particular times during the reigns of emperors. Within this information, we know the following: that Arrius Piso was married 3 times. At the time that he wrote the Vita, he had 3 living sons, because Alexander, the eldest son, was then dead, and there was his daughter Claudia. He did not have any children with his first wife. By further deduction, we find that Alexander and his brother Julius Piso both had the same mother, and their mother was Arius Piso's second wife, Boionia Priscilla. Brothers Justus and Proculius Piso had the same mother, and she was Arius Piso's third wife. It now appears that Claudia Phoebe's mother was also Boionia Priscilla, Arius Piso's second wife. As for the dates when his sons and daughters were born, we find those as: C is for Calpurnius, a clan of family middle name. Alexander C. Piso, born between 71 and 73. Okay, so Julius C. Piso, and that's the age they give him. Claudia Phoebe, these are the years. Justus Piso, Proculius Piso. Okay, Arius Piso's third wife is described as Jewish, who had been living at Crete. She, as has been said, was the mother of Justus Piso and Proculius Piso. Interestingly enough, since we see Proculius' mother as a Jewish, we see that one of the Proculius Piso alias name as Agrippa, a patently Jewish name. Note that our further research reveals that the mother of Arius Piso, 2 youngest children, Justus and Proculius, was actually Berenice, the sister of Agrippa II. We will get into this in much more detail in other examinations of this topic. Again, so here we go. We got these kind of characters in the first part. Just so you guys get familiar with these characters. They're kind of all related, intermingled, has something to do with the Pisos. One must keep in mind while thinking of this that what has been learned from this is there were very few people who were in control of so much of the world during that time of the Roman Empire. Remember, they were controlling the information. Only a few royals who outranked other royals within the Roman Empire, and in turn, the outranked royals ruled over and controlled the masses of the empire. This meant that for the royals to keep their power, the common people had to be completely kept in ignorance about the reality of using many alias names and who actually were the few persons who were doing so many things. You see that? So in order for people not to uprise and say, hey, how come you're the one writing all the books, right? Why should we believe only you, right? Let's say this one guy got 7 books. Well, it's better to have at least 5 different people writing these 7 books than one person, right? Then he can be like, well, I wrote 2 of them, man, only, okay? Here's some other sources. So people are, well, I guess it's just, if he's saying it and this other guy's saying it, then it must be okay. It must be true then. All right, we're good. So that was a good point. So making these alias names, it kept people in ignorance about the reality, right? No one other than those who were in control could write books that would ever be distributed widely throughout the Roman Empire. Remember, at this time, the flow of information is heavily controlled, all right, censored. Secret Service, police, remember? In this way, those in control could create an illusion by writing books. So they use books. Let's put it in a book. They'll believe it. Let's put it in a book. A part of the deception was the use of pen names or alias identities. The reason for this was to create the illusion that many different persons were writing, but actually only a few persons were actually writing. Doing so meant that the masses would think there was a measure of freedom that allowed many to be able to write and get their message out to other people of the empire. In reality, such freedom did not exist, all right? You couldn't just write anything. That's the illusion they had. Freedom of press, right? No, that was an illusion. There wasn't anything such as freedom of speech as we know it to be in the time that we now live. Arius Piso and his close relative went about writing under various alias names, creating and spreading this illusion. His sons too were actively writing to help make the illusions seem real. as did his grandsons too, who wrote and helped create this facade. Arrius Piso, also writing under many alias names, played many characters in history and in the biblical texts that they were writing. His son Justus Piso wrote as Justin Martyr. We have yet to learn of all the books that were written by each of the Arrius Piso's sons. So the author's saying there's probably a lot more that we don't even know about yet. Grandsons and the rest of his descendants. And his descendants became the future emperors of the Roman Empire. So you hear that? Even worse. So eventually his descendants became emperors. Okay? Arrius Piso's grandson Titus Antoninus, remember that the Pisos eventually came back into history as the Antoninus family. They stopped using the Piso name. So Titus Antoninus, which is Arrius Piso's or Josephus' grandson, became the Emperor Antoninus Pius, right? Piso, almost Pius. His successor, Marcus Aurelius, was a great-grandson of Arrius Piso. All right, Marcus Aurelius was Josephus' great-grandson. However, Arrius' son Julius Piso, Julius' son and grandson, were denied the throne. However, Julius Piso's descendants did eventually become emperors. But besides being emperors, the family members were the popes of the churches as well. They were the popes. Listen, Vatican, right? After all, they were the ones who had invented the religion and built the churches. It only makes sense that they would be in control of Christianity and the church. The church was a big money maker, as there were many things associated with the church that generated a great amount of wealth. This will be further explained as you learn more about this subject. As we dig more into this, you will see all the important parts that Arrius Piso, his sons and grandsons played in making a new Roman Empire, of which they held complete and total control. It was from their position of money, luxury, power, and control that they produced and used all the works that would seal their authority and completely fool the masses who were entirely clueless as to what was really happening. Had the masses known how they were being fooled and manipulated, they would have revolted and killed those who were oppressing them so harshly. We wish that more could be put into this one book, but that will have to wait until we can complete additional books to cover those areas. But don't worry, we got this. We have to admit that it is amazing to realize just how far we have advanced in our research of this subject, right? It's amazing. And the history of that time, it is so very complicated and must be researched on an extremely sophisticated level. This ain't for novices. So read and enjoy, learning about all the things we have placed upon the pages of this very important book that have never until now been brought to the attention of the general public in such specific detail.